So the idea behind this panel is to just have a look at the introductory books and to get people's perspective on what is a good introductory book, and also to perhaps bring up a book or two that we may have missed. I'll be the panel presenter, but there'll be 4 people who will actually be talking about books. We have Shannon Murray. He's classed himself as a bearded student of philosophy, and he's one of the co-organizers of Stoic on X. Simon Drew, who is the host of the Practical Stoic podcast, which I'm sure everyone's had to listen to. Paul Lanigan, who I can't see, he might have just stepped away, but Paul has been studying and practicing for the past 20 years and is an active member of the online College of Stoic Philosophers. And the final panel member is Sharline, who is an organizer of Brisbane Stoics and a driving force behind Stoic on X Australia. So the idea is that we'll just run through a few questions and we'll get everyone's opinion or answer to the questions. There might be a bit of discussion, but this is also a topic which I imagine a lot of people will want to add to, but I think we might do that at the end, so that just keep track of your questions, and then we can all bounce around our ideas about introductory Stoic books. Okay, so I will start off with a fairly broad question, and I might throw it to Simon. Simon, what works in an introductory book? Or what do you think works in an introductory book?
Well, firstly, hey, thanks for having me, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I'm in a park in Serena, North Queensland at the moment, which might be one of the least inspiring places to be doing this. But I'm on a road trip with my wife. But in terms of introductory books, I have to admit straight from the start, I might be the complete wrong person for this kind of panel, because I haven't read a lot of the introduction to Stoicism books. I've mostly delved into the ancient classics. I kind of feel like they are just, it's like water. You know, you can drink all kinds of liquids out there, but eventually you're gonna come back to the water, which is just so purifying. And so, you know, I think when it comes to Stoicism, for me, I always just tell people dive straight into the Marcus Aurelius, the Seneca, the Epictetus. And I do have to say, though, probably the one that I recommend the most to people is Sharon Labelle's The Art of Living. Her translations of some of Epictetus's best segments, just because she does a stellar job of translating them. It's really easy to understand, really great lessons. You can just turn to any page in that book and you're going to get something really meaningful and useful for your life. So that's probably the one that I say is the best, just because it's so unbelievably practical, and you can just flip through and straight away you've got something, you know, really good for your life.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Sharline, have you read many introductory books, and do you have what do you think works in them?
Yeah. I feel like I am the queen of introductory books. I prefer the modern translations. I know we're going to be talking about translations later. They are a massive, I feel, sometimes they're a really big barrier to whether you can, you know, engage with the text or not. So this one was recommended to me by Don Robertson, is John Seller's Lessons in Stoicism. It gives an account of, you know, 6 kind of basic principles in Stoicism. And it was a really quick read. It was, you know, I literally carried it in my back pocket of my jeans, and, you know, waiting 10 seconds, I'd be in this, and look, I've just opened up to what do you control. So it talks about quite a few overall principles. I've just started Ward Farnsworth's The Practicing Stoic, and I've really enjoyed how that, for me, if I was to recommend a book, it would be that one, even though I haven't even finished it. it seems to be tying in quite a lot of principles together with, all of the ancient texts, snippets of ancient text, etc. But it gives it like an overview of modern Stoicism, Stoicism in general, going over absolutely everything. So I've really enjoyed that one. In terms of practicing, so obviously we talk a lot about theory and that.
We're going to get to the practicing question a bit later.
Okay, then move on.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Welcome back. We started without you. Sorry for that.
That's all right, Bill.
Yeah. So the first question is, what works in an introductory book for you?
I think what works is simple language and a clear explanation of the Greek technical terms, such as arete, virtue, and eudaimonia, apatheia, if I've got it correct pronunciation. But I think one of the best ones that I have is this one. I don't know if you can see that. It's Keith Seddon. It's his book on Epictetus's Handbook, and it's a commentary on all the chapters in the Handbook. It's a very good, very clear explanation of Epictetus, because as we all know, the Handbook's a very condensed book, some sort of summarizing the discourses, and it shrinks it down to very small encapsulated sort of ideas, and Keith's explanation of those ideas is excellent. So that was a good one for me. Also, A Guide to the Good Life by William Irvine. I think particularly the introduction to that book's very good. If you don't go any further than that, it's still good. And lastly, the Donald Robinson's Stoicism and the Art of Happiness, because I think Donald's got this really good, clear way of bringing up of sort of putting the Stoic concepts into modern language.
Yep, thank you. And Shannon, same question to you. What do you think makes a good introductory book?
Yeah, sure. So I thought of like three things which are pretty similar to what's sort of been said already. So yeah, like that's a simple language, like it's achievable for someone to understand it. It needs to be something that people can interact with and read and take things from. So that would be the first one. The second one would be that it's a good basis for future readings, so that it gives you like a jumping off point to look further into other things. And the third one is that I think it should also be challenging, but I mean that in a very particular way. So I mean, it should make you have to actually think about it. You should be engaging with the book, because if it's not pushing you to change, you're not actually going to have some change. If you just read a book and it's like, oh, excellent, I'm already a Stoic and I don't need to do anything else. Maybe you are actually literally the sage, but this is highly improbable. And you've probably read something which is just a little bit too soft. Like there should be something like hitting you of like, wow, this is challenging. Like, oh, when my child's dying, like how do I respond to this? Like these sort of things. So those would be my three.
And everyone else had a recommendation or a book that they thought was good. Do you have one?
Yeah, sure. So I'd be the same as Simon. I'd go the Discourse or Meditations. I'd actually say both of those. That would be my choice for introduction. Okay.
And out of curiosity, was the first book you read on Stoicism? I'll go back to Simon for this one. Was the first book you read on Stoicism a book that you would recommend? Or what was the first book, and would you have recommended that?
So the first one for me was Letters from a Stoic, the Penguin edition of Seneca's Letters. I would recommend Seneca's Letters. However, I would recommend finding any version that you can get that gives you every single one of his letters, and not just the Penguin cherry-picked, letters from him. So that's probably what I'd recommend.
Yep. And I'll cycle through the different guests again. So Sharline, what was the first book you read, and would you recommend that one?
Yes, I was exactly the same as Simon. So it was Letters. But I started reading just what was prescribed through the Brisbane Stoics at the time. Alex McGee was organising that group, and I was actually looking at the free text, not a book. And I would not recommend. I would not recommend that, just purely on translation, which we'll touch on. But yeah.
Cool. Same question to you, Paul. First book, and would you have recommended that to someone?
Well, the first book I read in Stoicism was the Meditations. And I wouldn't recommend that because for several reasons, probably not popular from what other people have said, but to me, well, first of all, the translation I read was an old one, so that put me off. But secondly, because it's not a systematic approach. I mean, Marcus was just writing things at random, whatever came into his mind that day. So I wouldn't recommend the Meditations as a starting book, simply because it doesn't really give you a coherent picture of the philosophy, and it's only when you come back to it later, knowing more, that means more to you.
Yeah, I found the Meditations to be funny in that, but it seems to really grab the attention of others, and that's one of the interesting things about all the classic books. And Shannon, first book you read, and would you recommend it to others?
Yeah, so it depends how we count it. So the first book I actually read on it was a history book of philosophy, like it was on ancient philosophy, a new, what's it called? A new history of Western philosophy. That was the first time I actually read about the Stoics, and I would recommend that book very strongly. It's probably not exactly what people think of when they think of Stoicism, because it is a history book of philosophy. So the first like proper Stoic book I read was the Meditations. I disagree with Paul, but but like this really does. I think the edition you get is critical on this. Like the edition I had was absolutely amazing, and I totally agree. If you get the wrong edition for any of these books, you are not going to have a fun time. So I actually disagree that it's not systematic, but that's more because the edition I had actually explained the connection between all the sections. So it actually enlightened you to how systematic the philosophy is. But I totally agree with Paul. If I had have read it and it didn't have that, it would be a very, very different experience.
We've partially covered this next question, and is there a book that covers the fundamentals well? I think The Practicing Stoic, which Sharline mentioned, does a very good job. And I think in part that might be because he's not a practicing Stoic. He just likes Stoicism. But I'd be interested to hear from everyone else a book that they think covers the fundamentals of Stoicism really well. I'll start with you this time, Paul.
This one, Sellers' Stoicism.
Okay.
Sellers is a academic author, and so he gets right into the philosophy in depth. So yeah, I'd recommend that one.
Okay. Simon, do you have a book that you think covers the fundamentals really well?
Well, actually, Sharline did remind me of The Practicing Stoic, which I think, yeah, you know, when I did get that, I was often recommending that to people on the podcast, just because, you know, you go through there and yeah, very systematic, you know, also gives a lot of really great, you know, great quotes from other authors who have commented on Stoicism. And yeah, I just think that one's, he obviously put in a lot of work to making something like that possible, and I really trust his judgment. So yeah.
Shannon.
Yeah, so I would go, to have something different, I'd go the Inner Citadel.
Ooh.
I think it's not that bad. It's really good. It gives you so why I think it's really good is when I think of like an introduction or like starting out in learning Stoicism, I think this goes alongside with people also learning how to do philosophy. And this is why I think the Inner Citadel is really good, because it teaches you the importance of like reading the text in its context and like how that relates. It also goes through explaining the like the Stoic philosophy, at least from like what Marcus Aurelius, and to a lesser extent, well, it depends how you look at it, but like to a lesser extent what Epictetus was engaged with as well.
So it almost sounds like there's a, depending on how people want to jump in, would dictate where they're going to go for it. Because I must thank Paul. I've thanked him many times before, but he held my hand through the Inner Citadel when we read it with the Melbourne Stoa, and he had voluminous notes which made sense of it. And Sharline, is there a book that you think, you've already mentioned one John Sellers book and The Practicing Stoic, would they be the two that that you think cover the fundamentals well?
Yeah.
Yep.
Short and sweet, yeah.
Short and sweet, okay, brilliant. Okay, and I'll go to you, Sharline, for the next question, because you were about to jump onto it at the beginning. Is there a good book that you think provides a guide to practicing Stoicism?
Absolutely. I don't think I've come across one that is as good. So this is Massimo Pilucci and Gregory Lopez's book. So this is the Handbook for New Stoics. And it is literally a 52 weeks. You get an exercise each week. They have, so it breaks down. So week 18, for instance, is keep your peace of mind in mind. We have a quote by Epictetus. There is an explanation of the exercise, then what to do and how to actually do that exercise. You do that exercise for the whole week. It also gives you a why to do that exercise. So it's really in depth. And then there's the review at the end of it. So you can do this yourself. You can do it yourself, but I recommend doing it as part of a group. So Ian Perry's on, he's part of my Monday group. So we get together every Monday and we discuss our exercise that we did for that week. And my understanding of Stoicism, my practice, my tolerance, my anger, my everything has just improved 1,000-fold through weekly practice and weekly discussion, opposed to monthly talks and not actually focusing on that practice. Because, you know, Stoicism's a practical philosophy. You can't just read theory and theory and theory and get the same value if you're not practicing.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And it's something that I'm glad that book came out just for that reason, as a guide. Simon, is there one you'd recommend for practicing?
So I'll probably do almost the opposite of Sharline here, but just from a different angle. I mean, obviously, my show is called the Practical Stoic Podcast. I started that podcast, a few years ago when I was just getting into Stoicism, and I was really all about the practical. I did hear a quote recently, which I think really turned my mind around on a few things, which was, I can't remember who it's from, but it's essentially, there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And so when I heard that quote, I thought, okay, maybe I should change the way that I read the Stoics. And I think that there is something extremely practical in just picking up something like Meditations or Seneca's Letters, picking a letter and just reading it with the intent to polish your soul, to get something of value that you can take, not to the external practices, but to the internal root of those practices, just working on the way that you see the world, the way that you think about life. What does Marcus Aurelius mean when he says that the body is a river, the soul a dream and mist? What does he mean when he's talking about those sorts of things? What does Seneca mean when he says that we should despise the flesh? What do any of these Stoics say when they say you should throw away your books? It's like, spend some time with those kinds of crazy ideas that we think about. Oh gosh, does that really make sense? And see how it works with your mind and the changes that it sees. And I can tell you that this year, I've actually put down the books for a lot of time to try and search for some internal knowledge, not from some external source, but knowledge about how I actually feel, how I actually live my life, and what's actually going on inside me and the root of all of my everything, So, spending some more time on the theory, I think can be extremely practical in the long run.
Okay, so it almost sounds like you've forged a blade and now you're polishing and sharpening the steel, so to speak.
Yes, and I can guarantee that the practical external stuff in my life is going backwards as a result of maybe spending some more time in that. I know that I've stopped running as much this year. I know that I'm probably not as healthy as I was last year. But I can tell you that the way that I see my life, the way that I feel about my life, and the life that's happening on around me, is transforming more than I've ever experienced in my life before, as a result of trying to dig a little bit deeper. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, excellent. Shannon, you're next.
Yeah,
for practicing.
Yeah, I wanted to go next because Simon basically gave a similar answer to me. But so I've been thinking about this. I don't think this idea of thinking of the theory and practical as two separate things is the way to approach it, because it's not like when you read a book, your virtue waits at the door for you to come back to it. Like, you're engaged in an activity that's still shaping you, and like there's still, the theory is when you're reading the theory, you're doing a practical activity, and that's the way it should be approached. So it should be like, you should be reflecting, similar to what, oh gosh, was it David who's doing that? Yeah. Similar to that of where you're going running. It's like, reading sometimes sucks, but you just accept the suck and you embrace it. Like, then you can sort of learn and develop from there. So that would sort of be the way I would approach that. I don't actually really have a strong book recommendation. Like, I would go a similar path towards the reading the classics and really engaging with them. Like, I've tried that with the letters before, and that can be really rewarding. But I do feel I wish I had a book that I imagine there are books that do that better.
Yeah. And again, same question to you, Paul. Are you able to recommend a book which is good for the practicing element?
Yeah, I think Massimo's book on How to Be a Stoic, I found that had a lot of good practical stuff in it. Inner Citadel, again, it's got a lot on spiritual exercises. And I think Donald Robinson's book, Stoicism and the Art of Happiness, he's got some good, like, I think he calls them scripts, the view from above and so on. So they're three books that I think are good.
Yeah, and Donald Robertson has the CBT background, doesn't he? So he naturally leans towards including practical implementation of Stoic ideas. Right? So Judith is running this. We're up to the end. I'm going to see if Judith lets us go over, or if we can chat for a little bit, or if we're getting chopped.
Look, I'm just looking at our program here. We can go through to the hour, and then we're going to have a half hour prior to our keynote. So I think we can just continue if people are happy to do that.
Okay. I think something that's popped up a lot is translations, and I just want to mention something I've noticed. I found the Margaret Graver and A.A. Long version of Seneca's letters to be fantastic. I found A.A. Long's version of the Enchiridion to not be that good at all. So, and that was my personal reading of it. So translations are very touchy, not touchy, but different translations will strike chords with different people. If you could pass on a recommendation and why you think that recommendation is stronger. And I would say to lead the way, I think A.A. Long tries to modernize Epictetus too much and he doesn't quite nail it. Well, I think the tone of his collaboration with Graver is more suited to the text. That was my takeaway from that. But I'll start with you this time, Shannon, because you've spoken about translations a fair bit.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about the letters, because the translations I've read, I've not been happy with them. Like the one I have, I just find it good. So I'll definitely have a look out for that A.A. Long. And was it Graver?
Yeah, Margaret Graver.
Margaret
She
Graeber,
also
okay.
did the Emotions and Stoicism book as a separate book. She's very good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the one I would like around meditations, like I was talking about, this thing where if you approached it without a structure around it, it's going to look really weird. But I think the one you pretty much have to get is the Meditations, the Penguin edition, which is translated by Martin Hammond. That one's really good because that has at the back, it has basically a collection of different different themes, and then it lists like which part of the meditations has that theme in it, and you can see the structure in it that exists. That you'd need to have a more schizophrenic mind to be able to put that together by yourself. I think that helps a lot with that. The one for Discourse would be the Discourse Fragments and the Handbook, which is translated by Robin Hard, published by Oxford World Books. That one's really good. It has a good introduction as well. That's probably actually something else that's worth touching on. I really recommend reading the introductions. I know it's for some people it's a common thing to skip over them, but if you're not familiar with actually for any philosophy book, I think it's just worth it. It gives you a sense of who the person is. Not all introductions are going to be perfect. Some are better than others, but especially with those two versions, the Discourse and Meditations that I listed, the introductions are well worth a read.
Yep, thank you, Shannon. Paul, any translations, any comments on translations and translations you'd like to recommend?
Yes, for the Meditations, a couple of years ago, I came across a good one by two brothers called Scott and David Hicks, and they called it the Emperor's Handbook. It's the Meditations, very good modern language translation of it. I don't know how easy it is to find. What I'll do, I'll put the ISBNs up on the chat if anyone's interested.
Thank you. If all of the speakers could take the time to list things in the chat, I think everyone will appreciate that.
Yeah. And for Epictetus, I think, as somebody mentioned before that, I think it's the Everyman edition I've got, but it's the same thing, I think, the Handbook, Fragments and Discourses. And for Seneca, there's one I've got, Dialogues and Essays by Oxford University Press. It's like a modern translation of Seneca. But yeah, the ones that are in the public domain, there are various translations available there, some better than others.
Yeah,
that one's pretty good, Dialogues and Essays.
Yeah. Simon, you recommended starting off with the water. So which flavors of water or which brands of water do you drink?
I like that spin on it. It's perfect. So probably the New World Library version of Meditations. I know we're all giving everybody like 3 different versions to read now, so I'm not going to step on anyone's toes. Like, I think there are probably plenty of great versions out there. That's just the one that I've found that is pretty well translated into somewhat, modern English, and it's really easy to understand. Although I do think that it's really valuable to challenge yourself to read in, say, the older English styles and to try and understand, just in the same way that, I feel like if I was, for example, going to read something like the Bible, I would prefer to read maybe the King James Version, than to maybe go to some of the newer translations. I think that it's a fun and interesting challenge to push your mind to that. But apart from that, Sharon Labelle's The Art of Living translation of Epictetus's Best Fragments, I think that's just, as I said before, really practical and really just a beautiful translation. Seneca, I wish I had it with me right now, but I have this really strange internet encyclopedia version that I don't know where I found. I think I picked it up in an op shop. I have no idea. I wish I knew the translator for you guys, but it's really good and I like it, and it has all of the letters, and I haven't found anything majorly wrong with it yet. So maybe I can find that and get back to you guys when I'm back in my home.
Okay, thank you for that. And Sharline, your thoughts on translations, or what do you recommend and what do you think works or doesn't work?
Absolutely. My recommendation is pick up any book, read it. If you can't engage with it, move on. Yeah. Whether that be from a modern translation, old translation, and any kind of author. I feel like sometimes we get kind of fixated on you've got to just read the ancient text, or but if you're getting the same value from the modern Stoics, then that is just as good. I think naturally people will, if they start with the modern Stoics, John Sellers, etc., they're naturally going to be drawn to reading. It'll pique their interest, and they'll be, reading those ancient texts eventually. And at that point, then yes, you pick it up, you go, God, this is difficult, move on to the next one. Pick it up, oh, this seems to be easier. I've got like book 2, for instance, in Meditations, I've got 3 different, it's just book 2 for passage 14, and 3 different translations, and it's just wildly different. And some people will really, really enjoy the ancient, well, not the ancient, the older text, and they'll really thrive with that language and go, wow, this is fantastic. And other people will go, you know what? I love the guy who wrote it 60 years ago. Don't love the guy who wrote it 150 years ago. So I think just being aware of that translation, and then being free and giving yourself permission to move on and finding the next one.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to something Paul mentioned earlier. I really like the Keith Seddon take on Epictetus, and I think one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is that he does list the major words, his translations of them, and he does provide a description. Like a lot of other people, I've dabbled with Buddhism as well as Stoicism, and there's an excellent Buddhist translator called Glenn Wallace, and he is completely open with his choice of words and why he thinks they work. And I really enjoy reading writers who spend the time saying, I chose this word for this reason and this context. And I get that a lot from Keith Seddon. And the Graver, to go back to Graver, A.A. Long, Seneca, I do think it's in there as well, where they will footnote. And of course, the wonderful thing about reading on a Kindle, it's not the same as having a book, but you can just touch where it says footnote, it takes you to the footnote, and then you hit back and you're back again. So that's a nice modern addition. Final question. Outside of reading, what other resources would you recommend? And again, I will start with Shannon this time.
Yeah, sure. So I have 3, and in order of best to worst, or not as good. It's reading groups, like having like something like this, or face-to-face, where you have something you're reading and then you have a set time, you're meeting up, you're talking about the book, and then whatever period you meet again. The other one would be community groups. So what I'm thinking of there is like a Facebook group or something like that, where you sort of erratically engaging with it. And I think the third one would be lectures. There is a ridiculous amount of high quality lectures that exist on YouTube. It's not, I think like there is something about talking to someone else that it's just like, you're limited by your own prison if you are just doing it by yourself. But as the least good option, it still is a good option. In particular, I'd recommend Gregory Sadler. Is well worth checking out.
Okay. Sharline, outside of the books, what would you recommend for people to introductory and getting their head around Stoicism?
Yeah, absolutely other people, like Shannon suggested. Everyone is on a different, pathway, different level of knowledge. And so, you might be just new into it. You might be 5 years into it. You might be having studied for 20 years. Everyone's going to come to it with different interpretations and different experience of the text. And I think the thing I want to stress the most is that the overwhelming majority of people within the Stoic community are extremely giving and love nothing more than engaging with other people about the text, about the subjects, about, the practice. So absolutely other people. Then YouTube wealth. Greg Sadler has loads and loads of lessons. Yeah, I would go, and then like Shannon said, the other group. So finding your community group, but COVID's been great in a way for opening up our communities. So Stoicon historically in Australia has been Brisbane Stoicon, Melbourne Stoicon, and here we are doing Australia-wide. I have been engaging with the New York Stoics on their meetup group. Sometimes it requires waking up at 2 a.m. to listen to their talks. Other times it'll be 6 in the morning or 8 at night, but that was not open previously. And there's a wealth of knowledge from other community groups. And it's just mind-blowing.
Yep. Paul, what other resources would you recommend?
Well, of course, there's Simon's excellent podcast. And there's another podcast I'd recommend by Chris Fisher called Stoicism on Fire, which is more along the lines of a traditional Stoicism. He talks about Stoic physics there. Also, there's online, there's a college of Stoic philosophers that offer online courses if anyone wants to get into the sort of formal study of the subject for a modest fee, I think. But also, the groups. And we've got a group in Melbourne, the Melbourne Stoa, which Bill mentioned before. We meet every 2 weeks to discuss. And lately, we've been meeting on Zoom, which has been really good. They've got a meetup page, I think. That's about it. Yep.
And the Melbourne Stoa does have a Facebook page. I was involved with that, and I do miss it. But there's a Darwin Stoa, so we do what we can up here.
Well, you're welcome to join, Bill. You're welcome to join in on our chats on Zoom.
We feel too far away. But Simon, we started with you, and so we'll finish with you. What other resources would you recommend?
Sure. So I'm not sure if you guys want to take a little bit more time after this, just seeing as we do have until the hour. I'll just open it up there if we want to talk a little bit less about the books we'd recommend, but also how to read Stoic books or how to read philosophy, stuff like that.
After this question, open the floor and let other people.
Just a suggestion anyway.
Yeah.
But I think when I think about what other resources there are that I'd recommend, firstly, just off the top of my head, Heraclitus Fragments. Really, really interesting stuff. Heraclitus was the kind of originator of the term logos, and learning about the origins of that kind of idea. Just really beautiful writings from this kind of mystic poet philosopher. But when I think about things that people who are interested in Stoicism might read, I kind of immediately start to think of the kind of chats that I see online, and then I think Stoics could probably benefit from reading anything other than Stoicism, to let more influences, pour into this pool of philosophy that we're trying to understand here. So, I mean, for me personally, this year, I've been really kind of trying to diversify the influences that I allow into, my thought processes, not just Stoicism, but some of the things that have helped me the most have been, for example, look, it's probably going to be controversial because everybody either hates or loves this guy, but Jordan Peterson's lectures on YouTube about maps of meaning and the mystic origins of our society, the religious origins of our society, those lectures have completely transformed the way I look at philosophy, the logos, my life, and really have added to Stoicism. When I think about the cosmopolitan view of the world that the Stoics push, I think of people like Rupert Sheldrake, who is pushing out these really interesting theories about how memory is transferred around the world, between people, between communities and organisms. And his sorts of ideas really are interesting to put in comparison to the way that the Stoics talked about the universal whole, the well-ordered cosmos. So, looking for interesting people who are putting forward really interesting ideas, not just talking about Stoicism, but talking about probably what the Stoics would have been talking about if they were here today, like really trying to understand the universe, the soul, how everything works, So I think that for me, the biggest things that have changed me this year have had nothing to do with Stoicism, everything to do with pulling other very interesting theories into this, philosophical bucket, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and my personal thing is that I really enjoy the works of thoughtful science popularizers like Carl Sagan, Cosmos. Like that whole view from above is a lot easier once you wrap your head around the size and age of the universe. It's not an artificial thing moving your mind out. It's just the way things are. So I agree with the bringing in more stuff from more outside ideas can only enrich the garden bed of mulch for the garden bed of Stoicism, I guess. And yeah, so that's the end of the more formal side of this. I'd like to thank Sharline, Paul, Simon, and Shannon for volunteering and for providing such great answers and also so many recommendations. I saw lots of busy pen scribbling for people who had their cameras still on. And I think we should open up the floor. So if anyone would like to say something, have a question about something that was brought up, or just like to discuss what they've come across, now's the time.
So Paul had a question earlier about my Monday group. So we've actually been going, we started in, it was kind of late February this year. We're currently in week 33. 34. So the way that we get together is we get together on a Monday and discuss the week previously, but then also talk about the week ahead and how we plan to tackle that week. But in that practice, you know, we talk a lot about how that week had just gone and reviewing the practice and what it meant to us, what difficulties did we come across, whether we engaged with it and found it valuable, or, you know, if it's something that's, you know, not hitting us at that point. The way that it came about actually was through the New York Stoics group. So Gregory Lopez has this exact meetup through the New York Stoics. And because I'm a member of the meetup group through the New York Stoics, I got this email saying, hey, this is what we plan on doing. He's been running his group for 4 years. And once we finish with this 52 weeks, I will probably start again with a new group, because I found it really it's great to be able to have those conversations with people. I'll probably look at starting a few groups so that those who are interested can join on. But yeah, that's how we started. Thanks for the question, Paul.
I just noticed there was a really interesting point. I think it was from Dean back up in the chat in regard to books such as, and he named The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And so books that aren't specifically Stoic in focus, but might fit well into the worldview. So is Dean, would you like to speak to that?
Hi. Yeah, it was just a general question. I was wondering whether you had a list of books or recommendations that kind of encompassed those types of off-label Stoic books that essentially are Stoic in nature. Because I find that, I can't remember who said it in the chat earlier, I think it was Shannon, that it's quite difficult sometimes to get into the thick of the classics. And when you're reading particularly academic books, it's quite difficult to try to find something that resonates with you. But these layman books or these alternative perspectives really can kickstart your journey into a type of Stoic philosophy, and enrich your worldview in that way, in a different way. So I was just curious whether you or anyone had any recommendations on these different classifications of Stoic books.
Shannon.
Yeah, I think like Voltaire's Candid. I think that's probably a good one for like Stoic, and it is also exceptionally funny. It's just ridiculous, actually, like how funny it is, and it's so modern as well. That's the weird thing. But yeah, that'd be the one that I could think of. Yeah.
I would say any well-written novel, and that's because a well-written novel sketches out a person. And now people would say, Like there are some novels that are definitely plot driven, like your Tom Clancy page turners or your Ken Follett, and they're fun, like going to the movies to watch Arnold Schwarzenegger blow up the world. But something like Hubert Selby Jr. is an author who I think is incredible. He's not easy to read and not pleasant to read, but I think he captures people struggling with circumstance and trying to overcome that circumstance and become better people, given it really, really well. So, but any good writer in general, George Eliot, Ian Forster.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's my take on it. Anything is, to go to Simon's point, anything is fodder if it gives you an insight into people.
Do you think that goes back to a type of Carl Jungian philosophy or psychology? Because most stories are based on the journey, right? As Carl Jung laid out, where you have different stages and a character they confront some kind of obstacle and they have to overcome it and then reflect on these situations. Would you say that was Stoic in nature itself? And
no, my take on it, not really. I'm not across Jung. Kurt Vonnegut Jr. wrote his thesis on this, and he does a very funny presentation on the narrative structure. And I would find myself, I lean towards a more Kurt Vonnegut Jr. take on the world than a lot of other things, but that's just a personal preference. I'll put the link to the Kurt Vonnegut Guide to Storytelling in the chat, and it's not a long video. It's amusing, but there might be something in it for people who are interested.
Can I just jump in with one thing as well? I think something that I've been thinking about I thought about this towards the start of the year. You know, you look at the Stoics and a lot of ancient philosophies, they kind of broke it down into physics, ethics, logic. The way that I kind of try to think about that is there's basically three questions that the Stoics are trying to ask and get answers to, which is, one, what is all of this around us? How do we make sense of this universe that we've just been thrown into or thrown out of, as Alan Watts would say? And then the second question is, what does that mean in terms of how I should act? You know, the ethics is, how should I act around people? How should I live my life? And then the third question is, how do I know if any of that's true? The third question is a little bit iffy because we don't really know what consciousness is fully. So how do we know if any of it's true? But I think that when it comes to things that we are learning from other authors or teachers or books or movies or anything, like, some of the things that I've learned this year that have taught me the most have been from Disney movies, because like I said, you know, like learning about the mythological origins of these Disney movies and how we just don't even know what they mean until we see the patterns, right? The hero's journey. I think that if something teaches you about what the world is that we are living in, how you should act in it, and how you can know if any of that is true, that's something that is philosophical in nature, that is definitely in line with the Stoic way of learning. And if somebody was an extreme religious fundamentalist and they said, you know, hey, what are some books that I can read that align perfectly with this worldview that I have? You know, you'd be like, hey, you should probably diversify. You know, same thing here. You know, it's easy to narrow the choices when there's such a broad range of beautiful literature and philosophy and lectures and debates and all sorts of good stuff that can really enhance the way that you A, learn about the world, B, learn about how you should act in the world, or C, how you can actually know if any of that's true. So I think that if you simplify your goal to kind of those three questions, it can be kind of helpful in terms of allowing more in, if that makes sense.
Look, we've got a question from Paul, not Paul Lanigan, but different Paul. So are you there, Paul?
I am, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I just want to thank, I'm the Paul that asked the question that Sharline answered about 5 minutes ago. I just want to thank her for her answer. And just to follow up on that, is just staying in touch with the Brisbane Stoics meetup group, would that be the best way to sort of follow what you're doing with those reading groups? They seem like I'm kind of I'm sort of thinking more from the accountability point of view. Like I'm somebody, if there's a group expecting me to read this chapter every week, then I'll do it. Whereas if I'm left to my own devices, I'll probably find something shiny to distract me. So I like the accountability aspect of groups like that. So yeah, just staying in touch with Brisbane Stoics would be the best way to keep track of developments there.
Absolutely. And Brisbane Stoics also have a Facebook page as well. So jump on, become a member. And yes, absolutely about accountability. I found, you know, we do keep each other accountable. Ian can give his 2 cents if he would like. But yes, we keep each other accountable, and we might find that one week an exercise might be quite challenging. So we'll get in touch through WhatsApp and, you know, touch on the subject again. So, all right, you know, today I've done this, or okay, I've reached my goal today, and we just keep each other accountable because it is easy to get swept away by life. I personally have twins and they take up a lot of time and energy. So yes, having you know, other people to kind of go, hey, we were expecting a response from you. Have you read this chapter? Keeps you on your toes. Yes, and also with the group as well, because you get quite, you know, we know each other. We've been talking every week about quite personal things each Monday. I feel like we're now more friends than anything. So it's not an open group, and you know, the next round it will be a closed group again, because there's just this level of intimacy that we don't have in the monthly meetups, or you know, the Christmas session, or in Zoom as well. Like, with the way that we interact through Zoom is different on a large scale compared to when there's just 4 of us. We each have time to talk specifically, and you know, we move to the next person, move to the next person. 4 brains is better than 1. And 4 lived experiences are broader than just your own. So yeah.
Right, thank you. Look forward to it.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we might wrap up the session. I'd just like to thank Bill.
Shannon,
sorry, Shannon.
Shannon has just one more question.
Yeah, I just had one thing I sort of just wanted, something Simon sort of touched on, which I think is worth sort of underlining. Something we haven't really spoken of is how to read philosophy. And I feel I should just flag quickly that is a different thing, and it is a skill unto itself, the way you engage with it. Obviously, we're running out of time, so we can't really go through it. I guess just briefly to say it's about sort of being charitable and engaging with the text on its own terms. But there is a whole bunch of stuff there as well. So that's probably something else just to think on, that you can't read these books as a novel. You've got to talk to the author.
Maybe
I think Shannon's topic for next year's Stoicon.
Yeah. So it's been an awesome panel. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sharline and Simon. There's so much to talk about. We could keep going, but we probably all need to recharge the batteries prior to our keynote. So